picture this, you're trekking through the Ural Mountains.
Oh, yeah.
It's February 1st, 1959, the dead of winter, right? You're with a group of experienced hikers, students from the Ural Polytechnic Institute, and you're aiming for Otorten Peak, but somewhere along the way, something goes very wrong.
Uh-oh.
And this adventure turns into a tragedy that has baffled investigators for over 6 decades.
I've heard of this.
This is the Dyatlov Pass Incident. We've got excerpts from a book called The Dyatlov Pass Incident, a deep dive into the mystery, motive, and investigation. And let me tell you, this one is a real head-scratcher.
Oh, wait, bad.
So today we're going to try to unravel this mystery with you.
Okay.
Examine the evidence and the theories and the strange circumstances surrounding this case. So just to set the scene, this wasn't a group of amateurs just stumbling into dangerous territory.
Right.
These hikers were young, but they were experienced and well-equipped, familiar with the harsh conditions of the Ural Mountains.
Yeah, they were prepared for this trip. This wasn't their first rodeo.
Yeah, and one detail that always kind of gets me is that one of the hikers, Yuri Yudin, actually turned back early because he got sick.
Oh, wow.
Makes you wonder, what if he'd stayed with the group?
Yeah, what if?
Yeah, so focusing on the 9 hikers that continued,
right,
their diaries and their photographs paint a picture of a group that's in high spirits, pushing through those tough conditions, meticulously documenting their journey. Everything seems normal, even positive, until that fateful night on Kolatchiakal.
Kolatchiakal.
Which translates to Dead Mountain.
Oh, that sounds ominous.
Even the name sounds ominous. And this is where the group decided to set up camp on February 1st.
Okay.
And that decision, that location, is one of the first big mysteries of this case.
Why there?
Yeah, Dead Mountain, even the name is kind of creepy. And it's here on Dead Mountain where things take a really dark turn.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the tent, because this is where the first piece of the puzzle just doesn't seem to fit.
Yeah.
At all.
Okay, the tent, what about it?
So when rescuers found the tent, it was partially collapsed, covered in snow. But get this, it was cut open from the inside.
From the inside?
Why the frantic escape?
Yeah, that's weird.
And they left behind all their belongings, their warm clothes, their shoes, everything. Whatever drove them out into that freezing night. It wasn't a leisurely decision. Yeah. It was pure panic.
So they ran out into subzero temperatures, leaving everything behind. What happened next?
Well, the bodies were found in stages, and each discovery just added another layer of horror and mystery to this whole thing.
Okay, so let's break it down. Who was found first and where?
So the first bodies that they discovered were Doroshenko and Krivonashenko.
Okay.
Found about a mile from the tent,
right,
near the edge of a forest.
Right.
And here's the strange part. They were only in their underwear.
What?
Their hands and feet were burned, and there were signs that they had been climbing trees.
Like they were running from something.
It's like they were running from something, desperately trying to see what was chasing them.
Oh, that's creepy. Okay, so that's just the beginning of these strange details, right?
Yeah.
What about the next group that was found?
Right. The next to be found were Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, and Slobodin.
Okay.
They were found between the forest and the tent, and it appeared that they had succumbed to hypothermia, as though they were trying to make it back to camp.
Okay, so that's tragic, but at least it makes some sense, right? They ran out into the freezing night with minimal clothing, got disoriented, and froze to death trying to get back to the tent.
You would think so, and that's initially what investigators thought as well. It seemed like a tragic but somewhat explainable turn of events. But then the last 4 bodies were discovered months later, buried deep under the snow, and that's where this so-called natural explanation starts to crumble.
Why? What happened to them?
Because the injuries on the last 4 were unlike anything the investigators had ever seen before.
Oh, no. This is where it gets really bad. Okay.
Yeah.
What exactly did they find?
Well, Dubinina and Zolotaryov had massive chest fractures.
Chest fractures.
Similar to what you might see in a car crash.
Oh, but there were no external wounds.
Right.
Then there was Kolovatov, who had a crushed skull.
A crushed skull.
And perhaps most disturbing of all, Dubinina was missing her tongue and eyes.
Oh, my gosh. At this point, it goes from a tragic accident to a terrifying mystery. There were no signs of a struggle, no animal attacks, nothing to suggest a human assailant. And yet, this level of trauma, it almost seems like they were victims of some unseen, unimaginable force.
You know, that's exactly what the Soviet authorities concluded.
Really?
An unknown compelling force. Case closed. Move along. Nothing to see here.
But of course, it wasn't that simple. The way they handled the investigation only deepens the mystery.
Right, it does. The way the investigation was shut down so quickly, all those classified reports, the lack of transparency, it all just screams cover-up.
What were they trying to hide?
Right.
Was it something they knew or something they were terrified of not knowing?
It makes you wonder. So let's dive into some of the theories that have emerged over the years.
Okay.
We've got everything from avalanches and secret weapons to yetis and even infrasound. Where do we even begin?
Well, the natural place to start, I think, is with the avalanche theory.
Okay.
Given the mountainous terrain, it makes sense to consider that as a possibility.
Yeah.
It could explain the panic, the flight from the tent.
But if there was an avalanche, wouldn't there be some evidence of that? Wouldn't the rescuers have found, signs of disturbed snow or debris?
Right.
And what about those internal injuries?
Yeah.
An avalanche doesn't typically crush your rib cage from the inside out.
You're right to be skeptical.
Yeah.
That's one of the major problems with the avalanche theory. While it initially seems plausible, it just can't explain all of the evidence, or rather the lack thereof. Another theory that's been proposed involves something called a katabatic wind.
Katabatic wind.
These are powerful gusts that form when dense cold air rushes down a mountain slope.
Okay.
You can imagine how disorienting and even dangerous these winds could be.
I can see how a katabatic wind could explain the panic.
Right.
And maybe even some of the less severe injuries.
Yeah.
But a crushed skull, internal hemorrhaging. I'm not sure wind alone can do that.
And that's a valid point. It's why when we look at the evidence, we have to consider which theories are most likely to fit all the pieces of the puzzle, not just some of them. Another theory we need to look at involves the fact that this area was rumored to be near a Soviet military testing ground.
Okay.
This has led some to believe that the hikers might have stumbled upon something they shouldn't have seen, perhaps a secret weapon test gone wrong.
And that's where the reports of radiation on some of the clothing come in, right?
Exactly.
Interestingly, some of the clothing showed traces of unusually high levels of beta radiation.
Huh.
This detail, of course, fueled speculation about secret military activities in the area. But even if we accept that they stumbled onto something secret and were maybe even exposed to some kind of experimental weapon, what kind of weapon would cause the specific injuries we see in this case? We're talking about forces that seem to defy the laws of physics.
Exactly. And this is where things start to get a bit more speculative. Some people have pointed to Yeti sightings in the region, suggesting a creature encounter gone wrong. Others have even speculated about extraterrestrial involvement, fueled by reports of strange lights in the sky around the time of the incident.
I enjoy a good conspiracy theory as much as the next person. But are we really going to chalk this up to Bigfoot and aliens? Isn't there a more grounded explanation? I mean, we already talked about how unlikely an avalanche is, and while katabatic winds and even secret weapons are interesting, those theories just don't seem to explain the full picture.
You're right to be critical. It's important to evaluate each theory against the evidence, and there are a few more we should consider. One of these involves the indigenous Mansi people.
Okay.
The idea here is that the hikers may have inadvertently trespassed on sacred ground,
Okay.
which led to a confrontation.
But from what I understand, the Mansi people were known for being peaceful. And again, there were no signs of a struggle,
Right.
no defensive wounds on the hikers. It just doesn't seem to fit with what we know about the Mansi people or the lack of evidence of any kind of struggle at the campsite.
You're right to be skeptical.
Hmm.
It's important to consider all the angles, but also to apply logic and reason to each theory.
Right.
And that brings us to one of the more recent theories,
Okay.
which focuses on infrasound.
Infrasound.
Infrasound is a low-frequency sound wave that can have a pretty disorienting effect on the human brain.
Okay.
It can cause panic hallucinations and even physical discomfort. The theory suggests that certain wind patterns in the mountains could have generated these infrasound waves, leading to the hikers' erratic behavior.
Okay. That actually is pretty interesting. It could explain why they fled the tent in such a state of panic. It would explain why they might have made irrational decisions.
Yeah.
But does it explain the injuries, the broken bones, the missing organs? Can infrasound really do that kind of damage?
That's a great question, and it's one that researchers are still trying to answer. This case really highlights how little we truly understand about the impact of our environment on the human mind and body. Imagine the sheer terror those hikers must have felt to make such irrational decisions.
It's a truly unsettling thought. But even if we accept that infrasound might have played a role in the events on Dyatlov Pass, it still doesn't fully explain everything.
You're right, it doesn't. And that's what makes this case so fascinating and so frustrating at the same time. Even with all these theories, we're still left with more questions than answers.
Yeah.
It's like trying to put together a puzzle with missing pieces that don't quite fit.
So we've examined a lot of evidence, we've considered a lot of theories, but it seems like every explanation has its flaws.
Yeah.
Where does that leave us? Are there any new developments or new angles that might shed some light on this mystery?
Well, in 2019, there was a new Russian investigation,
Okay.
and they pointed the finger at an avalanche as the cause of the incident.
Okay.
However, this conclusion has been met with a lot of skepticism, even outright rejection by those who've studied the case really closely.
So you're saying that even with modern technology and advancements in forensic science, the Dyatlov Pass incident remains a mystery.
It really does.
And that's the unsettling part, isn't it? It's a case that just refuses to be neatly categorized. It defies our attempts at explanation.
It really does. And the Dyatlov Pass incident hasn't just captivated investigators and researchers, it's also had a pretty big impact on popular culture.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about that.
Well, it's become a source of inspiration for all sorts of creative interpretations.
Yeah.
Books, documentaries, movies, even video games have drawn inspiration from this event. There's just something about the combination of real-life horror, the remote setting, and the enduring mystery that captures people's imaginations.
So it's not just true crime buffs who are fascinated by this case.
Not all. The Dyatlov Pass incident has seeped into our collective consciousness. There's this 2013 horror film called Devil's Pass
Okay.
that uses found footage style to reimagine the incident with a supernatural twist. And then there's the video game Kolat,
Uh-huh.
which lets players explore a fictionalized version of the Dyatlov Pass area, piecing together clues and encountering all sorts of strange phenomena.
So it sounds like the case has taken on a life of its own, almost like a modern myth or legend. And I think you're right. There's something about unsolved mysteries that draws us in, that make us want to fill in the blanks, imagine what might have happened, grapple with the unknown.
Exactly. And while those creative interpretations are interesting, there are people out there who are still actively trying to solve this real-life mystery. The families of the victims, for example. They've never given up hope of finding out the truth.
Yeah, it's understandable that the families wouldn't want to give up, but is there really any hope of finding new information after all this time? I mean, you would think that every piece of evidence has already been examined.
You'd be surprised. There are still gaps in the official record, inconsistencies in witness testimonies, and even physical evidence that could benefit from being analyzed with modern techniques. For example, some researchers are pushing for DNA testing on the remains. They're hoping it might shed new light on the cause of death and maybe even identify any unknown individuals who might have been present at the scene.
Okay, so there's still a chance that we could uncover new information that's been overlooked all these years. Something that could finally crack open this case wide open. It's a long shot, but it's a chance nonetheless. But what if there isn't any new evidence to be found? What if we've already examined all the pieces of the puzzle and they just don't fit together?
That's a question that haunts every unsolved case, isn't it? The possibility that some mysteries are just destined to remain unsolved.
Right.
But even if we never find a definitive answer, I think there's still value in the search itself.
What do you mean by that?
Well, the search for truth, even in the face of uncertainty, is a worthwhile endeavor in itself. It pushes us to think critically, to examine the evidence, to question our assumptions, and maybe, just maybe, it helps us understand ourselves and the world around us a little bit better, even if it doesn't give us all the answers we seek.
That's a really important point. It's not just about finding the answer, but about the process of asking questions, seeking knowledge, and grappling with the unknown. What if the answers are out there, but they're being hidden from us? I mean, we've already talked about the possibility of a cover-up. Is it possible that the truth is out there, but it's being deliberately kept from us?
That's definitely a possibility, especially when you consider the political climate of the time. The Cold War was in full swing, and the Soviet Union was notoriously secretive. It's not hard to imagine that they might have had reasons to suppress information that could have been damaging to their image or national security. But even if there was a cover-up, there are people who believe that the truth will eventually come out.
What makes them so confident?
Well, information has a way of surfacing even when it's been buried deep. Documents get declassified. Witnesses come forward. And new technologies emerge that allow us to re-examine old evidence in new ways. It's happened with other Cold War-era mysteries, so there's always hope that it could happen with the Dyatlov Pass incident as well.
So what do you think is the most likely explanation for what happened on Dyatlov Pass? After diving deep into this case, what's your gut feeling?
That's a tough question. I have to admit, I go back and forth between different theories depending on which evidence I'm focusing on. But what keeps coming back to me is that the hikers were clearly terrified. Whatever they encountered, it drove them to make irrational decisions, like fleeing their tent in the middle of the night without proper clothing or equipment.
That's one of the most baffling aspects of this case, isn't it? What could have been so terrifying that it made them abandon their only shelter in those freezing temperatures?
Exactly. I find myself coming back to that question again and again. Was it something they saw, something they heard, or something they felt? Was it a natural phenomenon, a human threat, or something beyond our current understanding? The possibilities are both fascinating and unsettling.
We've covered a lot of ground today, from the chilling details of the case to the various theories and the enduring mystery. But before we wrap up this episode, I want to turn it over to you, the listener. What stands out to you about this case? What theory seems most plausible and why? And what further research do you think could be done to finally get to the bottom of this enduring mystery?
That's a great question. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your theories, your questions, and your insights.
We're all in this mystery together, trying to piece together the puzzle of what happened on Dyatlov Pass. You know, it's interesting, we've been talking about all the evidence and the theories.
Right.
But what really strikes me is the human element of this story. You know, we're talking about 9 young people full of life and adventure who set out on a journey and never returned.
It's a tragedy no matter how you look at it.
Hmm.
And I think that's part of what makes this case so compelling. It reminds us of our own mortality,
Right.
our vulnerability in the face of the unknown.
And it's not just about their deaths. It's about the way they died, those injuries, the strange circumstances.
Yeah.
It all just feels so unsettling, like something out of a nightmare.
I know what you mean. It's like this case taps into some primal fear within us, a fear of the unknown, of forces beyond our control.
And maybe that's why we're so drawn to mysteries like this.
Yeah.
They force us to confront those fears, to grapple with the limits of our understanding.
It's like looking into a mirror and seeing not just our reflection,
Yeah.
but also a glimpse of the abyss, the vast unknown that surrounds us.
And yet there's something strangely exhilarating about that, isn't
Mhm.
there? It's like a reminder that even in this age of technology and information, there are still things that we can't explain, things that challenge our perception of reality.
Absolutely. It's a humbling experience in a way.
Yeah.
It forces us to acknowledge that we don't have all the answers.
Yeah.
That there's still mysteries out there waiting to be uncovered.
So after all this discussion, all this speculation, do you think we'll ever know the truth about what happened on Dyatlov Pass?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I have to admit, I'm not sure. Part of me hopes that we will. That someday a piece of evidence will surface, a witness will come forward, or a new technology will allow us to see this case in a completely different light.
Yeah, I get that. I think we all crave those definitive answers. But what if those answers never come?
Right.
What if the Dyatlov Pass incident remains a mystery forever?
I think there's a certain beauty in that as well.
Yeah.
Sometimes the not knowing the mystery itself
Yeah,
can be more powerful than any definitive answer.
I see what you mean. It forces us to use our imaginations to come up with our own interpretations, to engage with the story on a deeper level.
Exactly. It keeps the story alive in a way, and it allows us to project our own fears, our own hopes onto the narrative.
It's like the Dyatlov Pass incident becomes a blank canvas,
Yeah.
onto which we paint our own understanding of the world, our own beliefs about the nature of reality.
And those interpretations can tell us a lot about ourselves, about our individual worldviews, and about our collective anxieties as a society.
So maybe that's the true legacy of the Dyatlov Pass incident. It's not just a mystery to be solved, but a mirror to be held up to ourselves.
It's a reminder that the world is a stranger, more complex and more mysterious place than we often realize,
Wow.
and that sometimes the most compelling stories are the ones that leave us with more questions than answers.
Well, I think that's a perfect note to end on.
Yeah.
We've delved into the heart of the Dyatlov Pass incident. We've explored the evidence, the theories, the enduring mystery,
Yeah.
and the profound impact this case has had on our collective imagination.
It's a story that continues to fascinate and haunt us, a testament to the enduring power of the unknown.
And we hope that this deep dive has encouraged you to think critically, to question your assumptions, and to embrace the mystery.
Remember, the search for truth is a journey, not a destination. And sometimes the most valuable discoveries are the ones we make along the way.
So keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the spirit of curiosity alive.
And who knows, maybe one day you'll be the one to uncover the truth behind this enduring enigma. But until then, the mystery remains and the story continues.